Hello, and my name is Jordan. Welcome to Life and Whiskey. Today we are going to be looking at Buffalo Trace Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It is a 45% ABV alcohol by volume or a 90 proof whiskey. We're going to go through that a little bit later on after we discuss a couple other things. I think you're really going to enjoy what Buffalo Trace has to bring to the table. Again, this is going to be a new distillery that I'm going to be talking about, so I'll give you a little bit of history on that as well. But first, I want to talk about whiskey and the pricing of whiskey. Um, I have seen some absolutely outrageous prices out there, as I am sure you have as well. People have heard of things like old Rip Van Winkle, paying several thousand, 2,000, 1,500, $2,000 for a bottle of that. I'm fortunate enough to live in a location where we have a local place where we can actually sample some of those every year. I've had the opportunity to sample the famed 10-year, 20, and 23-year-old Rip Van Winkle stuff. And for starters, I'm going to say price is not indicative of flavor quality and how much you're going to like it. Everybody's palate's a little bit different, so that alone means that there's stuff out there that you're not going to like that people are paying outrageous amounts of money for. Um, and So let's break down what drives some of those prices. I guess that would be the first place. So in whiskey, the thing that drives price is rarity, and rarity can be achieved several different ways, right? So let me just get back to my notes here a little bit. Um, Aging, right off the top, anything that's aged is going to be rare. So the longer that something is aged, the more rare it's going to become. Number one, because you have a huge investment in the actual aging process, which means you have to put something in a barrel and then leave it alone and hope that nothing happens to it for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, right? So that alone means that the stock in which a distillery has to choose from that is of a given age class is going to be less the longer it sits, because that is money out of your pocket that is sitting there longer and longer and longer. The other thing that comes in with the aging process is the angel share. What that is every year a certain percentage of that barrel is going to evaporate out of that barrel as that barrel breathes. And so by the time you get into the aging process for, you know, 20 years, you could have 30% of the alcohol that you had put into that barrel evaporate out. So now you only got 70%. And that's also dependent upon the climate in which the aging process is taking place. In some places, you leave a barrel for 30 years, you might only have 30% of the liquid remaining in the barrel. So that will also create rarity. Um, Another factor of rarity is going to be production quantity. So if you're a small distillery, like a micro distillery or a craft distillery, as it would be, perhaps you just aren't able to work in the volumes that the big distilleries can, right? So you like your MGP out of Indiana or your Wild Turkey, or Jack Daniels, any of the big names you're familiar with, they're dealing with millions of barrels of whiskey. Whereas your craft distiller might only have on hand, aging maybe 10 barrels, even, or maybe they don't even have like a full size barrel and they got the smaller barrels that are only 10 or 15 gallons. So that is a factor that can contribute to um, rarity. And then finally, the one that most people are familiar with, demand. So the laws of supply and demand, they also work in the world of whiskey. So if something's in high demand and people are pulling it off the shelves as fast as the distributor can get it there, that's going to jack up the price. And along those lines, you'll see that there are secondary markets out there, which means that some people are buying whiskey and then reselling them. So classic example. So I said Old Rip Van Winkle, right? That's one of the coveted whiskeys out there. That's selling for upwards of thousands of dollars. Now the MSRP on that, I want to say, is something like $76, but there's only a couple of hundred. I think it's only a couple of hundred bottles, if not only a couple thousand bottles per year are released. So that right there automatically makes it rare. And little tidbit, if you aren't aware already, the Rip Van Winkle is the same recipe, and it's not the exact same barrels, but it's in the same rick houses, same everything as the Weller lineup that is produced. And so now that word has gotten out and people are more familiar with that, the different Weller lineups and Weller brands are becoming harder to find as well. A good example is the Weller Antique 107. So I live in Wyoming, small town Wyoming, middle of nowhere, and I just bought a bottle of Weller 107 the other day to be saved for a celebration bottle, and I paid $57. Now my wife and I went out over Valentine's the other week, and we went around town and we looked at the different liquor stores that we had in town, and we compared prices. So we could definitively say, hey, we're getting a great deal on, or the best deal in town. Maybe not a great deal, but the best deal in town anyways. And we compared liquor stores. Now, in one liquor store, that bottle of Antique 107 was $57. In the next one, it was $59. And prices were kind of all over. But we were able to find that bottle for as cheap as $45 here in town. Now, I've seen online in other locations and have seen discussions by other people of paying $300 or $400 for that exact same bottle. Same with the Special Reserve, which is actually a cheaper bottle. The Weller Special Reserve, it's the green label bottle. I could pick that up. Again, those same store lineups. I saw it for 27, I saw it for 29, and then at the store that I'm now going to be patroning, it was $24. And I've seen that go for $150, $200, $300 for that same bottle. So depending on where you are in the country and how hard it is for you to get your hands on a bottle and what the actual demand is that is driving that bottle, a retailer is going to mark up that bottle to whatever price they think they can and still be able to sell it. So, when it comes to price, those are kind of the major contributing factors to the price you're going to pay. And not all brands are released to all places, right? So it might be regional. You might only be able to get a certain variety in a small geographic area. That also is going to make it more difficult to get, more rare, and also help drive the prices. Coupling with all of that, right? So the actual amount of money coming out of your wallet at the end of the day when you go to the cash register to pay for your purchase. You have other things that factor in. Taxes being a big one, right? So in some states, I lived in Washington State for a very, very brief period of time, thankfully. They have a 20.5% sales tax on liquor. So if you went into Costco, and they'd always advertise the big Costco bottles and the great prices, right? You would see there was 3 prices that were listed. First price would be the retail price, right? So, a 175 of Maker's Mark. Say, I don't remember what it was, but let's say it was $40, right? Then underneath that, they would show the state sales tax that was being levied against that purchase. And then they would have the state liquor tax that was being levied against that. And all said and done, now all of a sudden that bottle, instead of being $40, is closer to $60. So, state taxes actually play a huge role. And the alcohol control system that's in place in that state, so the laws that are regarding alcohol purchases and sales within any given state, also are going to reflect in the prices. So that's something that needs to be kind of brought to mind. And then you also have your local sales tax and your state sales tax and all those other things that will factor in as well. Proof is another good one to think about. So not everything is at the same proof. Now, whiskey, we know as a category, must be above 80 proof or 40% alcohol. But if you get a higher proof whiskey, that means that they're not cutting it with as much water. Or if you get like a barrel or cask strength whiskey, that means they didn't cut it at all. So however much liquid is in a barrel at that given point, that's all they got to work with. And so the higher the proof, the less they get to cut it, the less volume there's going to be. Therefore, the less number of bottles you can create out of any given barrel. So that is also contributing to the scarcity or rarity of a whiskey. Um, so that's probably where I'm going to leave that. And that's those are just some things I want you to think about when you're starting to look at whiskey and the different prices. And hopefully you guys aren't having to pay some of these outrageous prices. And if you are, I'm very sorry for you. That's something to maybe keep in mind if you're driving through another state or something, or if you live close to a border of a state. If you can think about maybe finding stuff a little bit cheaper here or there, you might want to explore that a little bit. Along with maybe being able to find the different releases that aren't available in your area. But if you're traveling by plane, make sure that you abide by all the airlines rules and stuff like that. So make sure you check into that as well. So that's the discussion for today anyways, is pricing and whiskey. And as I alluded to before, I'm going to say it again, price does not equal quality necessarily. There are some amazing bourbons and other whiskeys out there for cheap. And when I see cheap, I mean under $10, right? So one of my favorites, it's a very corn-heavy flavor, is JTS Brown. And that whiskey, you can get it for $10. A little bit later on in this series, you're going to see that I do a review of Evan Williams. Now, several of their bottles go for under $12. I got their Evan Williams green label. I picked that up for $7.92. And it's a great bourbon at any price. I mean, you could put that up to $20, and I bet it'd still be, not asking too much money. Same with their Bottled in Bond series. That is also another great whiskey, higher proof. It's at 100 proof by law, and therefore, that should be commanding a higher price. I think I picked that up for $12.99, maybe, something in there. I'll double check those before I do that video, but they're pretty darn cheap whiskeys. And I would say those are every bit as good, and I would prefer those over the the Van Winkles and stuff. So now I said I've had those before. Now they're rare. It's an experience. It's something that should be enjoyed. I'm not poo-pooing them at all. It's definitely not my palate. With something that's been aging that long comes flavors that I don't necessarily like. It was a very, very smooth, meaning the burn was gone and it was not difficult to drink the whiskey, but it was very, very high in barrel oaky flavor. So, I mean, to me, I always described it, it tasted like drinking and what you imagine an oak stave tastes like. That's exactly what it was. So if I were a person that spent $2,000 on a bottle of Van Winkle 23-year-old, I would be absolutely pissed at myself because it was not good, at least what I would describe as good, and certainly not worth that kind of money. So, a lot of it goes with your flavor profile, what your personal preferences are. And so, I'm sure people like those flavors. I personally don't, so I would never pay that amount of money for stuff. I'm also kind of a cheap bastard when it comes to things, and so, I'm looking for a bang for the buck. So if I can get an amazing whiskey or a really good one for sub $30, definitely sub $60, I'm all in. So, again, just another thing to think about as we start going through these reviews and you start hearing notes or flavors or ideas of things that you might want to try. Definitely get out there and check those out. Okay, so now we got that life part out of the way. We're going to transition into the review part. So boom, here we go. Buffalo Trace Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. All right. Whew, good stuff. Good smelling stuff. All right, so this is the first time I've done a product from this distillery. So we are going to run through just a brief overview of the history of the distillery itself. So Buffalo Trace Distillery is in Frankfort, Kentucky, um, and is owned by Sazerac Company. It has a lot of history, touts itself as being one of the oldest in the country with the most history. It's also, I looked at their website, did a little bit of research, said it was the most award-winning distillery. Um, I can't back that up, but let's say, it's on their website, so let's just say it's true. I don't know or not. Um, Man, sorry, it's just good smelling stuff. Uh, there was a distillery in its current location that dates all the way back to 1775. Now it has changed names, and different companies have come in over time, and different distillers have come in. But from 1775 till now, there's been a distillery in its current Frankfurt location. And some of the famous names that have either been the distillery name, been the distiller, owned the distilleries, whatever throughout history are ones that you would probably recognize. So names such as George T. Stagg, Old Fire Copper, which is OFC, that's a brand that they still hold today, are previous distillery names. And then the people. So George T. Stagg was also a person. E.H. Taylor, Blanton, Weller, Van Winkle, Thomas H. Hardy. These are all people that are brands that you probably recognize and have heard of before. And so several of their brands that they currently own are named after distinguished people from the past. And funny enough, so they rebranded as Buffalo Trace. In the near recent history here, and they did not really have a Buffalo Trace whiskey, even though they were Buffalo Trace distillery. So they built all this backstory and everything, but they didn't actually have a whiskey that matched their name. So when people were taking tours and saying, "Hey, can we try some of that Buffalo Trace whiskey?" they didn't have it, right? So the first release of Buffalo Trace whiskey was done in August of 1999. So that was when you could first get a Buffalo Trace, and now it's their flagship whiskey. Now here where I live, I've been lucky enough to be able to obtain this whiskey I got for $19.99, so $20. You should be able to find it for $20 to $30 depending on location, but it's worth every penny in my opinion when it comes to that. It has no age statement, and it's a straight whiskey, which means that it's at least 2 years old. Or all the barrels that went into the blend of it are at least 2 years old. And I've already said it's 90 proof. The mash bill for this is mash bill number 1. They don't really release what's in it, but they got 2 mash bills at Buffalo Trace, and so this one's mash bill number 1, which is a lower rye than the other brands that they release. So it's not going to have as much of that spicy note in it. And yeah, okay. So here, sorry, I've been nosing this the whole time, but we'll get into the nose here and some of the characteristics that I got. You get a little one of the first notes. Now I have trouble picking out the fruit notes when I do a nosing. For some reason, those seem to get buried on me. But it has an apple note that I can pick out very distinctly, very forward, followed by some oak with a little bit of honey and caramel. Has a sweet spiciness to it that I really enjoy that smell. And then for me, it finishes with like a brown sugar note, like a very brown sugar. So it's all those sweeter notes that you tend to pick up in bourbons. But they're blended together really nicely. And like for me, each time I go back to it, I can pick out a different note very distinctly. Like, so every time I stick my nose in it, it's like, boom, there's one scent. And then like I go back again, expecting to find that same scent, and then boom, something completely different, which is very nice to me. I enjoy the variety that this brings. All right. Man, it's just good. Very, very good. All right. So for me, this thing starts out with a very rich vanilla flavor. Kind of moves into a caramel, but it moves through that note pretty quick. And then a light fresh fruit. As I start moving into the finish on it, it goes like, if I were to describe the finish from like the middle flavor through, I hit like this light fruit, apples, pears, I don't know what exactly it is. And then it goes into a barrel spice, and that note just sits and lingers. Like, it's still on my tongue now. And the more it sits, the more apple it becomes. And it's just velvety smooth, lightly oil coats the tongue. It's really, really nice. So what I'm going to say about the finish on that one then is, sorry, I'm just going through my head thinking of all the different flavors and kind of working my way through the profile. So for me, like, I still taste this apple that's lingering for like maybe 7 to 10 seconds after I swallow it. But like the rush of flavors that go into the finish just kind of go right through to me. So in that regard, it has a short finish, but that the last note just kind of sits and lingers for me, and it clears off. Like I said, it was oily, but it's like oily smooth on my tongue. But it's not a lingering thing, so it doesn't sit on my tongue and just kind of coat it. It just kind of right off of it. But even now, I still get that apple flavor on there. So um, it's an excellent bourbon. I just opened this bottle couple of days ago and tried it for the very first time. I'd never had it at that point, and I'm kind of ashamed that it took me this long to try it because it's an absolute excellent bourbon. I would say this is an excellent intro into the bourbon category of whiskey. So if you're not a bourbon drinker or if you're not a whiskey drinker, this is something that is not very challenging. It's very light and sweet. And it's a great one that you can sit and experiment with. It's 90 proof, so you might want to try and add a little water to it or something. You could bring it down a little bit, see if it opens up a little bit more. I definitely think that that would change the profile, and if you're new to whiskey, that might help you out a little bit. Um, but for I picked it up, like I said, 19.99 here in town. For a $20 to $30 whiskey, I think it's punching way above its class. I think that I'd probably pay $40 for a whiskey like this. If somebody said, "Hey, this I paid $40 for this. What do you think of it?" I'd probably say, "Yeah, okay, that fits into the $40 category very well." So for getting it for way less than that or half that, I'd say this is an excellent place to start without breaking the bank. Um, and it's just a good general sipper. Like, I could sit and sip on this all night, and it would go with a nice after dinner drink sipper, good conversation kind of a thing. So yeah, I encourage you to get out there, pick up a bottle if you haven't already. Give it a try, see what you think. Leave any comments you have below. Tell me what your experience has been with it, or what you think about it, or what you think about the prices of whiskey. Maybe let me know what some of the prices are. How about for an apples to apples comparison? Why don't you tell me what Buffalo Trace is going for in your state or your region? And then that way we have a little bank of information for people to kind of compare prices against, so that way they know what they can maybe expect to be paying and whether or not they're paying too much for something. Anyways, I know this video was a little bit longer than the previous one, but hopefully you got some good information out of it. And thanks for watching, and I hope you stay tuned for the next video. And please like, subscribe, and do all the YouTube stuff. I mean, I'm only going to keep begging a couple of times for that kind of stuff. Yeah, hope you have yourself a great rest of the day, and we will catch you later. Thanks again.